Thanks, Mark. I'm glad to be back. Well, on the teaching end, I've certainly been with the group as we sit. And I want to add in my own shout out and thank you to Karen Breen for her leadership. And just want to mention that even as she's led through some very challenging times, that Karen has just been a beautiful model of leadership grounded in her own spiritual practice. She's a decades long meditator and just, like I said, a beautiful model. So thank you, Karen. I'm going to invite us all to arrive, continue to arrive. Set aside, as Mark has already suggested, but I'll just repeat, set aside anything that may be distracting. Find your seat. Begin to allow the mind to drop into the body. So notice your feet on the floor. Notice your hips in the chair. Notice any other points of contact between you and the chair, the floor. Just allow yourself to be here. Check in with your breath. See what it's like today in this moment. Is it shallow or deep? Short or long? Cool or warm? As you continue to arrive, I'm going to share some teachings from Parshat Balak. This is one of my favorite mindfulness teachings, one that is very alive for me. Feel free to listen to my words. There'll be a moment of looking at the screen, or you can ignore all that and just take this opportunity to sit in this space that we have all created for each other. I invite you to take for yourself whatever resonates in my words and simply leave the rest. So the story in Parshat Balak starts with the story of Balaam. It's a wonderful story full of magicians and angels and a talking donkey. It's a study in what we are able to see and what may be hidden from us. And it deserves our close attention. But today, for our mindfulness practice, I'm just focusing on one tiny part, because for me, it offers a way of dealing with my own habits when I realize they may be or I may be causing harm. So when I go through my day and I pay attention, it's pretty amazing how many times, just for a second, thoughts of annoyance and satisfaction show up. The weather's been great, but today it's getting humid, and I'm going to sweat when I go for a walk. The neighbor's dog is barking when I'm on the phone. This batch of blueberries isn't as sweet as the last batch. My phone doesn't recognize my face, and it won't open right away. When I fold the towels, they don't fold exactly square. And in that second, there's a feeling of annoyance, dissatisfaction, maybe even anger. And these are the kinds of things that the mind will think in a second. It just, boom. Before even thinking about it, I may make some sound or sigh of annoyance, the one that I always make, Without thinking, I might clench my jaw or hands or shoulder that have been a lifetime of habit. And sometimes I notice I make the same sound my mother made when she was annoyed. Yes, I see you smiling. It's like, yeah, you know, my mother's was. So often it's no big deal. But sometimes these habits can cause harm. When the sound I make spills over and sounds like I'm criticizing somebody else. And sometimes I'll just notice the thought as a thought that I don't have to do anything about. I can watch it rise and dissipate all by itself. So to the Parsha. There's this teaching in the Talmud that relates to the Parsha, where we find the idea that God gets angry for a nanosecond every day. So I'm going to put the text up, but I will read it all, so you don't need to open your eyes if you don't want to. So here we have in the Talmud Avodah Zarah, and it says, El Zoem B'chol Yom. The sages taught with regard to this verse, a God that has indignation every day. This line comes from Psalm 7. And the Gemara, the Talmud goes on and says, and how long does his indignation last? It lasts a moment. And how long is a moment? 1 in 53,848th part of an hour. I'm going to just call it a nanosecond. A very small amount of time. That is a moment. The Gemara adds, and no entity can precisely determine that moment when God is indignant, except for Balaam, the wicked, that it is written concerning him. And they go on. So the Gemara returns to this question and says, rather, what is the meaning of and knows the knowledge of the Most High? Aha. I'm gonna stop the share for a second and give you a little backstory. So in the story of Balak, Balaam is a pagan prophet, a hexer, somebody who can make a curse and make it stick. He's hired by Balak, the king of Moab. Balak, the king, is afraid of the Israelites that are camped on his lands because there seems to be so many of them, and it seems to him that they, quote unquote, hide the earth from view. So Balaam, the hexer, the pagan prophet, is hired to curse the Israelites, and he has a reputation for successful prophecy or curse. And as the Gemara says, we have this idea that God gets indignant every day. And the source of Balaam's power is that he knows that moment. He knows that moment that God is just going to make the... And Balaam depends on the very habitual nature of this divine outburst. That's when he speaks the curses. But when Balak asks Balaam to curse the Israelites, this is where I imagine that God becomes aware of God's own habit and realizes that if that habit is followed, it will bring harm. And so instead of acting out, God just notices and somehow inhibits or makes room for that anger to be there without acting on it. What happens next is really quite marvelous. Instead of the regular dance, where God loses it and Balaam gets set up and speaks a curse and takes credit for being a powerful magician, what comes out in that space is not curse, but blessing. These are the words that come out in that moment. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, Jacob. These words that we often begin morning services with. By changing the habit, by just giving it room to be there without acting on it, what comes forth is blessing. And I love the play on words that I learned from Rabbi James Jacobson Maisels on this, that bracha, blessing, we can split it into two. The b is in, and racha is softness. In softness. So instead of bearing down on the annoyance, the dissatisfaction, and the anger. Instead, softening and just making room for it to be there for the nanosecond it's going to be there without needing to act on it. One of the rabbis of the Talmud brings up a seeming contradiction to this idea that God gets furious once a day. And it says, with the magnitude of divine power and this level of anger, why is the world not simply destroyed? So this is from Rav Papa, who says, when it is only one thing, referring to an individual, then it can't stand. But when it is written that God is indignant every day, it's referring to the community. And the community can withstand it because of our cumulative merits. Not everything. There's good and the bad. And so when we are consumed by powerful emotion, how can we exist? How can we not be simply carried away? How can we regain our equanimity? When strong emotion is the only thing, we get carried away. But when we are more balanced, when we connect with the body or breath, and remember, for instance, if my toe is sore, if all I'm thinking about that toe is that toe, it's the whole world. But when I remember that sore toe is not the whole world, that my sore heart or hurt feelings are temporary, because it feels other ways too. My heart also feels happy and other ways. And that I share this sore toe and the sore heart with many, many sentient beings. So when Balaam looks over into the valley, getting ready to let fly a curse, he thinks he knows how things will go. But God makes room for that indignation to settle, to soften, to just be without needing to act on it. And in doing so, create space for something new. So let's sit. I'm going to take us through a meditation where we can have a chance to be compassionately present with our own feelings, with all of them. So if you're not already, go ahead and sit in a relaxed way, any way that you can feel both relaxed and alert, enough energy to stay awake, but still relaxed. Allow your eyes to either close or gaze gently downward. Come down from the thinking mind into the body and take a few breaths, allowing the belly to be soft. Feel it rise and fall with the breath. And settle into the feeling of your body as a whole. From the top of the head, shoulders, heart space, back, hips, thighs, calves, feet, the body as a whole. And notice any physical sensation that shows up in any part of your body. Becoming aware of it in a deeply allowing way without trying to change it at all. Just let it have the space it needs to find its own way of being. And if any other physical sensation replaces it, just become aware of that sensation, but in the same deeply accepting way. And now, if you like, sense whatever emotional feeling is present within you, from within your body. Not just thinking about it, but sensing how it feels from within. And at first you might think that you're not feeling anything, but often you can become aware of a subtle emotional feeling that might not have been even fully conscious to you, like a little anxiety or worry, maybe a little bit of confusion, maybe liking or disliking how things are in this moment, or even a sense of trying to hold on to things. You might feel stronger emotions too. Annoyance, joy, maybe even numbness. These are all feelings you can practice with. And as you become aware of these feelings, just give them deep permission for them to be here. Gently welcoming, without being carried away or being enmeshed in them, without rejecting it, without needing to solve or change anything. Just like a friend, sitting quietly with a friend. Let this feeling have all the space it needs to find its own place and settle in its own time. Rest with the feeling, or rest within it. Just letting things be. And after some time, just settle fully into this feeling of spacious acceptance. Let it help your heart and mind to trust and relax deeply. Let any patterns of thought or feeling that arise simply unwind and release within this utter openness of awareness. And we will sit silently. Continuing to be present and just noticing what that experience was for you. I'd like to hand it back to Mark as we remember loved ones who've been lost.
Thank you so much, Julie. Beautiful. Friends, we seal our practice, as we always do, by understanding ourselves as a minyan, as a community of support for those in mourning, observing yard sites, and inviting those who are to share the name or names of anyone you're including in our Kaddish today in the chat box. And I invite you to join me in rising in body or in spirit to recite Kaddish together. Yid Gadol, Yid Kadash, Shemir Rabbah, Yalma, Divra, Chirutei, Mamlich Malchutei, V'chayei Chon, Yomei Chon, V'chayei L'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala, U'bizman Karev, V'imru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Varach, Ba'olam U'amen, Amayah. Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Yitba'ar, Yitramam, V'yitnaseh. V'yithadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitala, shemei d'kudusha, v'yichu, la'ela, min kol birchata v'shirata, v'chata v'nechamata, v'amilah ba'ama, v'imru, Yeh shlama rabbanu shamaya, ayim, aleinu, v'yam Yisrael, v'imru, Shalom Yirama, Uyaseh Aleinu, Yalkol Yisrael, Yalkol Yoshvei Tevel, Imru, Amen. Friends, thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you, Cantor Julie Newman, for leading us so beautifully. And thanks to you as well, Julie, and to Bill Klingon-Smith for sponsoring our practice today, to honor Karen Breen for her presidency and leadership of Rodef Shalom congregation in your native Pittsburgh. Thanks, of course, always to Adi Stein for holding our tech space, our tech Mishkan sanctuary with skill and grace. Everyone's invited to stay on for a few minutes for conversation with Cantor Julie Newman about today's beautiful teaching and practice. For those who are leaving us, we hope you'll join us tonight for our evening of gratitude at 8 p.m. Just a reminder of that. And if not, or in addition to that, we hope to see you this week as well as we continue with our practice, led tomorrow by Rabbi Chassia Uriel Steinbauer, who will be joining us from Israel. On Wednesday by Larry Yermak. Thursday, Rebecca Schisler, a wonderful teacher, also joining us from Israel, who's new to our lineup. And on Friday, Rabbi Lydia Medwin will lead us from Atlanta, Georgia. So we have a wonderful lineup of teachers for this week. We hope you'll join us for any or all of those sessions. So if you do have a question for Cantor Julie Newman, please put it in the chat box. And Julie, just want to start by saying thanks not only for the beautiful teaching that you've offered over these 15 so plus months, but also for you being such an integral part of this circle of practice, and bringing both of those in. So that's grateful for that. And this is just an amazing teaching. I just loved it. It also made me think of that line in Psalm 30, Ki rega ba'apo, there's which is in the morning liturgy. Ki rega ba'apo chayim birtzono, for God is angry but for a moment, but God's will is for there to be life, which is really in keeping with this teaching. But but let's stay with this subject for a minute, okay? Because I know the whole idea of the wrathful God of the Old Testament, right? The angry God is there's a lot of spiritual therapy to be done around that for a lot of people. So let's begin there, okay? Because this really is a reframing. Like, two things I guess I have two questions I want to ask, and I'm going to keep an eye on the chat box. One is that question about what do you do with this idea of a God who gets angry? What does that mean? What does that even mean? Even if it's just for a moment, okay? So, but there's that might be a newsflash for a lot of people to understand Judaism or practice, which understands that God gets angry, but it's really like for a nanosecond.
Right.
Um, whereas the general presentation is this is a God who's angry all the time, right? So there's that. That's number one. And number two, I was really taken by your invitation for people, for us to get in touch with our emotions, our feelings from the inside, from the body. And I think that's worth spending a couple of minutes unpacking that a little bit. Like what is that practice and how do we do that? And what does that mean? Both, I think, really important.
Those
So
are
let's start with the anger, or no,
things
whichever you want to start with.
for our next week-long retreat.
Yes, right.
Um, so I don't have a bow to put on the anger, and I don't have a theological bow to put on it, except that I resonate with it, that it exists, and that when we think of it in terms of being God-sized anger, it touches in me that feeling of from when we're a small child, how being angry somehow destroys the whole world,
Mm-hmm.
as if like when we're lost in anger, it's like everything else is lost. And so like I said, I don't have a theological bow to put on this. I really can only use it for helping me live my life, for helping me see.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, yeah, somebody else is going to have to talk about it from the other perspective. And I'll just add to that that I think this is one of the ways that God has written God's self into the Torah in order to help us as a blessing, as a favor to us of like, here, this is important to look at and to grapple with and to think about in terms of you transforming yourself most fully into a human being. Like,
Yeah.
large feelings exist,
Mm-hmm.
and what do we do with it?
I think that's really helpful. And like I guess to turn it on it, to turn it around, if we are extrapolating from our own experience, and we have a sense that, I mean, we're operating, we IJS, and our teachers are generally operating under the theological assumption that God is in everything, right? God is in everything, and that when we get in touch with our own experience, everything that's happening within our own experience also is of God. And there isn't a human being that doesn't have the experience of anger. So anger is part of the menu, right? It's on the menu. The question is, what do we do with, like you said, just said, like, what do we do with it? How do we handle it? And the basic teaching, just to reflect your teaching back here, that I'm getting is that anger has its place, and yet it can be, for it to serve its sacred purpose, it needs to be diluted in this ocean of awareness, right? Of love.
Right.
Like I said, the world can, we can withstand it if it's applied to the community. If you look at the big picture, then it will not destroy us or others. But it
And
needs to be. Go ahead.
and it may be the information that we need.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
it's necessary because anger, annoyance, all dissatisfaction, they're bits of information. And if we can take it as information, we can cultivate wisdom from
Hmm.
it. Knowing, and so that for me, the big teaching is knowing that it exists and I don't have to act on it.
Hmm.
I can learn, I can take it as information, learn from it, but I don't have to act on it in a habitual, unthinking, unskillful, unintentional way, leaving a trail of broken things behind me.
Yeah. There's a
And
question. Go
yeah,
ahead. Finish your thought. Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, and that is the lesson that I get from a God who's angry for a nanosecond a day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great, I mean, that nanosecond is really so fantastic. I mean, because then it says, okay, so there's the proportion, right? You know, um, there was a question about, and this is really, I think, just is a good definition of mindfulness practice in general, which is about waking up and seeing what is hidden. And it seems to me that when we, and this is the segue into that second question about noticing our emotions, that in any given moment, I might like feel like, well, I'm not angry, I'm not angry right now.
Right.
But I've sort of had this sense of, well, all those emotions, every emotion is there, it may be, more or less, accentuated at a given moment, but it's always there. Like if you, if I really look, I could say like, I'm always angry about something, um, but, and to go with what you said is like, oh, and that's important information, you know, because if I'm not aware of it, that can wind up really driving my behavior. So I
Right.
want to wake up to it, right? So let's talk a little bit about what you were saying about emotions, right? Like I invite people usually when we begin, as you know, to this, like say, like take an inventory of your emotions right now, like what's present, what's swirling around. But you were taking it a step further to invite people to think like, where is that in your body? So maybe you can say a little bit more about that.
Right. So I'll combine the parsha that starts like with Vayar about Balak seeing and Bilam seeing what Bilam sees and does not see. That I sit to start to become aware of what is there. And when I can see it, I can choose to respond to it or not respond to it. And when I don't see it, I'm gonna respond in habitual ways, in just mean and nasty ways, maybe. But when I settle down and sit and start to see what's there, maybe that anger, which can be overwhelming and frightening, that I'm normally am trying to just push away, that I can begin to stand to be with it.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't force me to push it away or to act with it. It's not driving me. I can just stand to be near it and kind of wait, let it relax, release, or know if it's like existential, if it's like really important and I got to act on it right now. But by sitting and seeing sort of the internal weather
Mm-hmm.
often,
Mm-hmm.
I start to catch on to myself and my own internal emotional habits. And I can just say, oh, yeah, that's that dissatisfaction that I have a lot of times, or that's my fear that I'm not going to be liked, or I'm not, or people aren't going to like what I do. That's just that fear. Hi, fear. I know you. I recognize you. I've made it 63 years with you, and it's okay. And I'm going to just ask you to sit on your hands for a little while I do this thing that might be a little scary, but I'm pretty sure is going to turn out all right.
Yeah. Heidi, as Heidi said, okay. Sometimes we use the phrase duly noted, objection noted,
Yes. Right.
anger noted.
Right. Right.
We'll rule on that later, Um,
Right. Right.
how about when one is, what do you think about the idea about certain emotions like anger? And when we're talking about anger here, it seems pretty clear that we're also talking about a spectrum, right? It's not just one thing.
Right.
It can range anywhere from mild annoyance, or disappointment
Yes.
to rage, and somewhere along the way, but things are not going how this is unpleasant. I perceive this as unpleasant. It's not going the way I would like it to go, or it should go, according to my will, and therefore it's it's a like. So when you said there's data there, part of when I just said that out loud, it made me think, well, that's a piece of data. Like my habit of mind is that I am controlling of this. I'm in control of this world, or I should be,
Right.
and my will is really what should reign. Oh, thanks for that reminder. That's crazy thinking. So, and if I can laugh at myself about that, that this is part of me that feels I should be master of the universe, and I can say like, that's absurd, then I can let that go and the anger can dissipate a little bit. But
Right.
the question I was going to ask you is that, like, do you associate certain feelings with particular parts of the body? Like, for example, anger, whether it's, in the chest or in the belly or somewhere else in the body. What do you think?
I think we all have our own places where we hold it.
Hmm.
And or maybe where we hold it back so hard, trying not to know that it's there. So for me, my jaw,
Hmm. Oh, that's good.
like I'm always swallowing angry words, like don't
Mm.
let it out. And like, what if I can just release that and like, okay, anger's here, but it's gonna go away and I don't have to do anything about it. And I don't have to clench my jaw. And then my dentist won't tell me that my gums are receding because I clench my jaws all the time.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, right, right. But also shoulders, hips, hips, a lot of emotion in the hips, just
Hmm.
places that we clench that we're trying to, that our body, small muscles, sometimes big muscles, are acting as if it's a physical threat. And therefore they're like getting ready for battle. And here, and I'm doing this. You're not see this, but
Hmm.
I'm doing this to show you, like my hands. And
Hmm.
I noticed for myself, there's a lot of times when I would be in a difficult conversation that my right hand would clench or grab something a little tighter. Like somehow I'm physically trying to defend or support myself in a way that really is not doing anything useful. And in fact, it's harmful in that it sends messages back to the sympathetic nervous system that says danger, danger, and it's kind of a circular thing. So that
Hmm.
my mind is telling my body this is scary or uncomfortable, and then my body is telling my mind, and I'm kind of ratcheting up. And how do I get out of that? It becomes a cycle, and then the thoughts can go with it too. And then all of a sudden you're doing the same dance you've done with this person or this situation. And how do I break out of that is by coming back to the body. Notice, oh, my hand is clenched. Can I take a breath? Can I just, oh, there's some freedom. There's some freedom. That's that moment of freedom where something new can arise, something different can happen. So at anywhere along the chain, if we release, relax, don't act out, we have a chance of changing that habitual flow.
We're at time, so we have to leave it there. And even though I'd love to continue this is so great. Um, so thank you, because it's always just great to learn with you and practice with you. And I think people really appreciated that this is such a practical takeaway. Just to end by saying like one of the things I really appreciate about this teaching is that the transformation that you just described leads to blessing, right?
Blessing. Yeah.
That what can the curse of the curse of the toxic energy of the anger, right, is dissipated enough that the blessing that's locked inside that can emerge,
Yeah.
and that's that jujitsu kind of move that's really
Right. Right.
usually when that happens, because I we're on something here. I think we're on the right track. So that
Yeah.
was just beautiful, beautiful teaching. Thank you so
I would
much for
just add
leading
one
us
thing.
off this way.
One thing more.
Yeah,
We have this,
yeah,
it just dawned on me, but we have this tradition of 100 blessings a day. Maybe these are
right,
part of
exactly.
maybe it's not about words, but maybe it's about 100 times a day of not going down that path.
Right. We're tempering anger in that way. Beautiful. Okay. Thanks to you, and thanks to you and Bill for sponsoring today too and doing it all. Mazel tov, Karen, and thanks Adi. Thank you all, especially for being here, practicing together. Hope to see you tomorrow with Rabbi Chasya Uriel Steinbauer joining us from the Galil in northern Israel.